I'm the director of the Agricultural Institute, and I always advise people on what to plant for a good harvest. But behind my back, they say, I just want to take their money. My name is Dr. Margaret Ellison, and the cruelest words I've ever heard were not from an enemy, but from the very people I spent my life trying to help. She only wants our money. Her advice isn't for us, it's for her pocket. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I was 58 years old with nearly 3 decades of service as the director of the State Agricultural Institute. To me, agriculture wasn't just a field of study, it was life itself. I had grown up in the dirt quite literally on a modest farm in Iowa. My parents were simple people who believed in two things above all else: that the land never lies, and that hard work never betrays. Those beliefs shaped me, and they shaped the way I taught, guided, and advised generations of farmers. Every year, farmers came to me for advice: what crops to plant during which season, how to rotate the soil for maximum yield, how to choose seed varieties resilient to pests or droughts. I became not just an academic, but a trusted voice. I sat in their kitchens, I walked their fields, I checked the moisture of their soil with my bare hands. It was not uncommon for families to say Margaret saved our harvest. But then came the day when those same words of gratitude turned into something darker. At first it was subtle. A neighbor I had known for 20 years avoided my eyes at the grocery store. A farmer's wife who used to bring me pies during planting season stopped by less often. Then, in whispers I was not supposed to hear, came the accusations. They said I was steering farmers toward seed suppliers who gave me something back. They said I recommended certain fertilizers because I had a deal with the manufacturers. It was absurd. Every piece of advice I gave was rooted in data research and years of practice. I never pocketed a dime from any supplier. But as anyone who has ever lived in a small town knows, rumors are stronger than the truth. They travel faster than the wind across a wheat field, and once they take root, they are nearly impossible to pull out. One afternoon, I was hosting a seminar at the Institute. About 30 farmers had gathered, some eager, some skeptical. I was talking about crop diversification and the dangers of relying too heavily on corn in a season of unpredictable weather. Suddenly, a hand shot up in the back. It was Henry Walsh, a middle-aged farmer I had advised for years. His farm had survived 2 droughts because of my rotation plan. His voice cut through the air, sharp and bitter. Tell me, Margaret, how much do they pay you to push those seed varieties? You're not advising us for free. You're lining your own pockets. The room fell silent. My throat tightened. I wanted to shout to defend myself, but the words caught in my chest. I tried to respond calmly. Henry, I've never accepted money from any supplier. The data. But he interrupted. That's what you say. But everyone knows you wouldn't be spending all this time unless you had something to gain. The farmers shifted in their chairs, murmuring. Some nodded, some frowned, others looked away. That moment carved itself into my memory. It was the day I realized I was standing on a field of distrust, and the seeds of suspicion were already sprouting. I went home that night, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the stack of notes I had prepared for my next seminar. For the first time in decades, I asked myself, why am I doing this? I had never expected riches from my career. My salary was modest, my life simple. I drove a 10-year-old car, lived in the same farmhouse my late husband and I had restored years ago. I had given everything to this work because I believed in it. But suddenly, I felt foolish. What good was a lifetime of integrity if people saw only greed when they looked at me? I couldn't sleep that night. The words of Henry Walsh replayed in my head like a curse. The faces of the other farmers, some doubtful, some quietly supportive, haunted me. For the first time, I questioned not just their trust, but my own strength. The betrayal stung most because I had given these people not just my knowledge, but my heart. I had celebrated their good harvests as if they were my own. I had mourned their losses, even offered financial help to a family when their crops failed. And now I was the villain in their whispered stories. And the whispers didn't stay hidden. They grew louder, spreading through the community like a blight on healthy crops. I heard them at the diner, at church, at the farmer's market. She's in it for herself. She's not one of us anymore. She's forgotten what it means to be real. I wish I could tell you that I brushed it off, that I held my head high, confident that truth would prevail, but that would be a lie. I broke down. Alone in my home behind closed doors, I wept. Not for myself, but for the faith I thought could never be broken. The Institute board called me in the following week. One of the members, a man I had worked alongside for 15 years, leaned across the table and said quietly, "Margaret, people are starting to talk. We can't afford for the Institute's reputation to be questioned." It was then I realized the whispers weren't just talk anymore. They were becoming consequences. My position, my credibility, everything I had built was at risk. And that is how my story began, not with a triumph, but with betrayal. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just question your work, but tears at the core of who you are. I should have known even then that once suspicion takes root, it will demand a harvest. The moment Henry Walsh's accusation echoed through the hall that day, it did more than bruise my pride, it cracked open something deeper. I could feel the ripple of unease spreading among the other farmers like wind through tall grass. They had trusted me for years, yet one sharp question planted a seed of suspicion I could not easily uproot. It was strange how quickly things shifted after that. A week earlier, I could walk into the feed store and be greeted warmly with people asking about soil treatment or seed prices. Now I noticed conversations pausing when I entered, eyes following me, but lips staying tight. It was as though they all shared a secret one I wasn't meant to hear, but could feel pressing against my skin. One evening, after finishing up some late paperwork at the Institute, I stopped by the farmer's market to pick up fresh vegetables. The air smelled of apples and hay, the familiar chatter of neighbors filling the square. As I reached for a basket of tomatoes, two women just a few feet away lowered their voices. "She always says she's helping, but have you seen her car? Must be getting something from those seed companies. She's smart, I'll give her that. But no one works that hard for free. Not for us." I froze. My car was old. My clothes plain, I had never lived extravagantly. But to them, my very position of knowledge had become suspicious. Expertise itself was now a sign of hidden profit. I wanted to confront them, to say, "Do you think I'd waste 30 years of my life scheming against you when I could have taken a cushier job in the city?" But the words stayed locked in my throat. I picked up the tomatoes, my hand trembling, and walked away without a word. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen again, the ticking of the old wall clock growing louder with each passing minute. My late husband Paul had always been the one to calm me when doubts crept in. "The land doesn't lie, Margaret," he used to say. "If your advice works, the fields will show it." But Paul was gone now, and so was that steady reassurance. The next blow came at church the following Sunday. Faith had always been my anchor, the pews filled with neighbors who felt like family. But during coffee hour, as I poured myself a cup, one of the elders approached me with a tight smile. "Margaret, people are concerned," he said, lowering his voice. "Maybe you should consider being more transparent about your recommendations. Folks are saying they want to know what's in it for you." I nearly spilled my coffee. "What's in it for me?" I repeated, incredulous. "I don't take a dime from suppliers. My only goal is to keep this community thriving." He patted my arm as if I were a child too stubborn to see reason. "I believe you. But not everyone does. Perception matters, Margaret." Perception. That word stung more than I can describe. Because perception, once twisted, becomes truth in the eyes of the crowd. And in small towns, perception spreads faster than wildfire. The final straw that week came from within my own institute. A junior researcher, a woman named Emily, who I had mentored since her graduate days, hesitated during a staff meeting. We were discussing new drought-resistant soybean varieties when she glanced at me, then at the others. Maybe we should avoid pushing specific suppliers too much, she said carefully. Some of the farmers think, well, they think we're not being impartial. The silence in the room was suffocating. My own protégé parroting the whispers of the town. I wanted to shout at her, "You know me better than that." But instead, I clenched my jaw, swallowed the bitterness and nodded as though it were a reasonable suggestion. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something else take root inside me, not despair, but anger. Cold, steady anger. Because I knew the truth, I had never betrayed anyone. The land bore witness to my honesty. The crops that thrived because of my guidance, the families that survived drought and flood thanks to my strategies, those were the real evidence. Yet none of it mattered because a few whispers had become louder than the harvest itself. I remembered my father's words when I was a girl. Trust is like topsoil, Maggie. Rich and fertile, it takes years to build. But one heavy storm can wash it all away. And this was my storm. But unlike my father's fields, I was not going to let this soil wash away without a fight. The next morning, I walked into the institute with a new resolve. If suspicion was sprouting, I would not sit back and watch it choke out the truth. I would document everything, every piece of advice, every result, every yield report. If I was to be tried in the court of public opinion, then I would bring evidence no rumor could erase. Still, the sting of betrayal lingered. Each day I felt the distance grow between myself and the community I had given my life to. Farmers who once invited me into their homes now kept me at the gate. Children I had watched grow up turned away shyly when I smiled at them. And late at night, alone in the silence of my farmhouse, I wondered, was this what all my work had come to be doubted, distrusted, cast out by my own people? One afternoon, as I walked through a field with a clipboard in hand, Henry Walsh appeared again. His arms were crossed, his expression hard. "You know, Margaret," he said, "if you really cared about us, you'd show us the receipts. Show us you're not making money off this." I met his gaze steadily. "Henry, I've never made a profit from advising you. My payment is seeing your fields flourish." He smirked, shaking his head. "No one does anything without a reason. You may fool some of us, but not me." And with that, he walked away, leaving me standing there with the wind tugging at my coat, my clipboard suddenly feeling like a useless shield. That night, I wrote in my journal, "It isn't enough to tell the truth. I must prove it. And when the time comes, I will not just defend myself, I will expose those who planted these lies." But in that moment, all I could feel was the weight of suspicion pressing down on me heavier than any harvest I had ever carried. The rumors spread like a fungus across damp soil, unseen at first, but eating away at the roots until the plant collapses. That was how I felt, hollowed out, my foundation weakening, while on the surface I tried to remain composed. In the mornings, I would still put on my blazer, gather my files, and drive to the institute. I still stood in front of classrooms filled with students, still answered calls from farmers asking for urgent advice. Outwardly, I was the same Dr. Ellison they had always known, but inside every whispered accusation gnawed at me. I noticed the shift most at community events. At the Fall Harvest Festival, where I once helped judge the largest pumpkin contest, the air around me was thick with suspicion. Children pulled on their parents' sleeves, whispering questions. "Is she really bad?" I caught fragments of conversations, each one slicing deeper. "She must be making a fortune on the side. Why else would she spend so much time telling us what to grow? You think she'll get caught?" I forced myself to smile, tasting the bitterness of it. Smiling had become my armor. But even armor grows heavy when worn too long. One evening, as I was leaving the institute, I passed a group of young farmers leaning against their trucks. They thought I was out of earshot, but I heard one of them laugh. "She thinks she's the savior of agriculture. Truth is, she's just a businesswoman in disguise." The others chuckled, and I drove away with their laughter echoing in my ears. It wasn't just strangers. My own family began to question me. My niece, who had always admired my career, asked me bluntly over dinner one night, "Aunt Margaret, are you working with those companies? People say you get a cut." I dropped my fork, the clatter startling us both. "Do you really believe that?" I asked, my voice cracking. She shrugged, looking down at her plate. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everyone's saying it. Everyone's saying it." That phrase became a noose tightening around my neck, because when everyone repeats a lie, it begins to look like truth. The loneliness was suffocating. The farmhouse, once filled with warmth when Paul was alive, now felt like a cold, empty shell. At night, I would sit at the kitchen table staring at the stack of notes and reports that proved my work was honest. Yields had improved, families had prospered, and yet none of that mattered. Numbers didn't speak louder than rumors. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a county meeting about crop resilience. As I stood at the podium, faces stared back at me, some curious, some skeptical, some outright hostile. I spoke clearly, explaining the science, the data, the proven outcomes. But I could feel the wall between us built brick by brick from suspicion. Halfway through, a hand shot up. It was Samuel Briggs, a farmer whose family had benefited greatly from my advice years ago. His voice carried across the hall. "Dr. Ellison, people are saying you push certain fertilizers because you're tied to the manufacturers. Can you tell us here in front of everyone that you don't get a single dime from them?" A hush fell over the room. All eyes were on me. I steadied my voice. "I do not accept money from any supplier. My only concern is the success of your harvests." But then a murmur rose, someone whispering, "Of course she'd say that." Another voice muttered, "She's too smooth practiced." Their doubt swirled around me like a storm. I could feel my hands shaking at the podium. For a moment, I wanted to flee, to run from the crushing weight of their disbelief. But instead, I lifted my chin and continued. "Every recommendation I've ever made is backed by research, by results you've seen in your own fields. Judge me not by rumors, but by the soil beneath your feet, by the crops you harvest each season. The land tells the truth, even if people do not." There was silence. A few nods, but many skeptical frowns. I finished my talk, but the victory was hollow. Because I could see it in their eyes, doubt still clung to them like stubborn weeds. That night, I sat on my porch, the autumn wind chilling my bones. I whispered into the darkness, "What more can I give? What more can I prove?" And no answer came back. Days blurred into weeks, the whispers never fading. Some farmers still came to me in private, grateful for my help, but even they carried an edge of caution, as if associating with me might taint them. Others turned away completely convinced of my corruption. The hardest part wasn't their distrust. It was the feeling of being erased. For decades, I had been the woman they trusted with their livelihoods. And now I was invisible. Worse, I was a ghost they mocked behind closed doors. I began to wonder if perhaps silence was easier. If I should retreat, resign, leave the institute, and let someone else carry the burden. Maybe time would erase the doubts if I simply disappeared. But deep inside, a fire still smoldered. My father's words echoed, "The land doesn't lie." And I knew the truth. The soil, the crops, the harvest all bore witness to my honesty. One night, as I flipped through old files, I came across letters from families whose farms I had saved during hard years. "Without your plan, we'd have lost everything," one letter said. Another read, "You gave us hope when the drought nearly ruined us." I pressed those letters to my chest, tears burning my eyes. They were proof not just of my work, but of the bond we once shared. Proof that at least once they believed in me. And then I realized something: I couldn't let the lies win. If I gave up, the rumors would become the final chapter of my story. But if I fought back, if I endured, maybe I could rewrite the ending. Still, the question weighed on me like an anchor. Was I strong enough to face a community that had already judged me guilty? The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. It cut to the bone, leaving scars that I knew would never fully heal. but sometimes scars are the only evidence that we survived. And as I looked out over the moonlit fields, I made a promise to myself I would not let their whispers define me. One day I would make them see the truth. And when that day came, they would regret ever doubting me. Have you ever been in a situation like this? If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The breaking point came on a cold November morning when the community gathered for the annual Farmers' Council meeting. It was an event I had always cherished, a chance for us to share progress, exchange knowledge, and plan for the coming season. For years, I had stood at the front with confidence, knowing the weight my words carried. But this time, I walked in with a knot twisting in my stomach. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and damp coats, the air heavy with the buzz of conversation. Farmers filled the rows, boots scuffing against the wooden floor, their faces weathered by sun and toil. Some nodded politely at me as I walked past, but many avoided eye contact. That avoidance was louder than any greeting. I carried my notes, the results of months of research, soil rotation strategies, pest-resistant seed trials, water conservation techniques. I had facts, evidence proof. But I also knew that facts could be drowned out by a single rumor. As I took the podium, I cleared my throat, steadying my voice. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This year we've seen remarkable improvements in crop resilience. I hadn't gotten through my first sentence when it happened. From the back row, a young man's voice rang out sharp as a blade. Why should we listen to her? She's just in it for the money. The room stilled like a field gone silent before a storm. I froze my eyes, sweeping the crowd. The voice belonged to Jacob Mills, a farmer in his 30s. And not just any farmer, he was someone I had mentored. I had walked his land with him, shown him how to rotate soy and corn to save his family farm during a dry spell. I had believed in him when others dismissed him as reckless. And here he was, standing tall, his arms crossed, his words cutting me down in front of everyone. A murmur spread through the room. Someone chuckled nervously. Others nodded in agreement. I could feel my heart pounding, my face flushing. I tried to steady myself. Jacob, I began, forcing calm into my tone. You know better than most the truth of my advice. You've seen your own yields improve. But he shook his head, a smirk tugging at his lips. Maybe. Or maybe those seeds just happen to work. Doesn't change the fact that you push us towards certain suppliers. Everyone knows it. We're not blind. Laughter rippled through the hall, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. My stomach dropped. Betrayal had never felt so public, so raw. I gripped the podium tighter. I have never taken a single penny from any supplier. Every recommendation I give is based on research, not profit. Sure, Jacob sneered. That's what you say. But the rest of us? We're not so sure anymore. And with that, the weight of the room shifted. People leaned back, crossed their arms, whispered to each other. I saw doubt cloud their faces. My words, once trusted, now hung in the air like smoke no one wanted to breathe. The humiliation was unbearable. I had weathered storms before, droughts, pests, budget cuts, but never this. This was different. This wasn't nature turning against me. It was people. My people. I forced myself to finish the presentation, though my voice trembled. Each statistic I shared, each chart I pointed to felt smaller and smaller against the wall of suspicion. When I concluded, polite applause flickered weakly, more out of obligation than respect. As the crowd dispersed, I gathered my papers with shaking hands. My chest burned with shame. I wanted to run, to hide, to never face them again. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of Jacob surrounded by a small group, his words feeding their doubt. They looked at him as though he were the leader now, not me. That cut deeper than any accusation. I drove home in silence, the November wind rattling against my car windows. My farmhouse looked lonelier than ever as I pulled into the drive. Inside, I collapsed into a chair, my head in my hands. How could he? I whispered to the empty room. How could someone I helped turn against me so easily? But the truth was clear. Jacob's betrayal was not about me. It was about power. In undermining me, he elevated himself. The younger generation of farmers saw him as bold, fearless, unafraid to challenge the woman who had long stood at the helm. And in small towns, perception is power. The following days were torture. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of humiliation. At the grocery store, someone muttered, "That's her." At church, people whispered behind hymnals. At the institute, even my staff looked at me with uneasy eyes as though wondering if the rumors were true. And yet, beneath the shame, another emotion stirred anger. Cold, hard anger. I thought back to the years I had given Jacob, the weekends I spent on his fields, the personal time I sacrificed to help him succeed. And this was my reward. Mockery, public humiliation. It dawned on me that the whispers weren't just idle gossip anymore. They had become weapons wielded deliberately by those who stood to gain from my fall. Jacob was only the loudest voice. Others were feeding the fire from the shadows. I realized then that silence was no longer an option. If I let them continue, they would bury me and everything I had worked for. But if I fought back, I had to be careful. This wasn't a battle fought in fields or with machinery. This was a battle of perception of truth versus lies. And perception, I knew, could only be changed with undeniable evidence. That night, I pulled out boxes of records from my office, yield data letters of thanks from farmers, photographs of thriving crops receipts that proved I never accepted payments from suppliers. I spread them across my kitchen table, the papers covering every inch. I whispered to myself, if they want proof, I'll give them proof. And if someone is behind these lies, I'll find them. And when I do, I won't just defend myself. I'll expose them for what they are. But beneath my determination, the ache of Jacob's betrayal lingered. Trust once broken is never the same again. I had given him my time, my knowledge, my heart. And in return, he had given me humiliation. I stared out the window into the darkness of the fields, the moonlight casting shadows across the land. The soil doesn't lie, I reminded myself. But people can twist truth into poison. And I promised myself with every ounce of strength I had left that I would not let that poison destroy me. Loneliness is heavier than stone. That's what I learned in the weeks after Jacob's public betrayal. It wasn't just the humiliation of that meeting, though, that cut deep. It was the silence that followed, the way people who once waved at me now looked away, how conversations I used to join shifted as soon as I approached. For decades, I had been a fixture in this community. My farmhouse had been a gathering place, my institute office a hub for advice. But now it was as if I had become a ghost, present but not welcome, seen but unwanted. The loneliness gnawed at me most in the evenings. I would sit in the farmhouse, the lamps casting long shadows on the walls, and the quiet would press down on me. I missed Paul more than ever. He would have known what to say, how to comfort me without empty words. He would have reminded me that truth is like the seasons, it always returns. But Paul was gone, and all I had was the echo of his wisdom. One night, I invited my sister Helen and her husband for dinner. I thought maybe family would be my refuge. We ate roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Paul always loved. The conversation started light. Helen talking about her grandchildren, her husband discussing repairs on their barn. But eventually the topic shifted, as I feared it would. Helen set down her fork, her eyes soft but troubled. "Margaret, I need to ask you something. People are saying things about you, about the Institute, that you're profiting off the farmers." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You too," I whispered. "I don't want to believe it," she said quickly, reaching for my hand. "But it's hard, Margaret. Everyone's talking, even at church." Her husband cleared his throat. "If it's not true, you need to clear your name before it's too late. Rumors can ruin everything." I pulled my hand back, stung by the implication. "Do you think I've spent 30 years building this institute just to scam people? I've poured my life into helping this community." Helen sighed. I know. But perception matters. And right now, perception is against you." Perception, that cursed word again. After they left, I sat at the table long after the dishes were cleared, staring at the wood grain. If even my family doubted me, what chance did I have with the rest of the town? The weight of it pressed harder each day. At the institute, staff members whispered in corners, avoiding my gaze. I caught Emily, my young protégé, hesitating before bringing me data as though she too wasn't sure what to believe anymore. At the diner, conversation stopped when I entered. At the post office, someone muttered, "That's her, the one in it for the money." There were moments I thought about quitting, resigning from the institute, selling the farmhouse, disappearing into anonymity. Maybe somewhere else in a city where no one knew me, I could start fresh. I imagined walking away, letting the lies fade into memory. But then I would remember the families who once wrote me letters of gratitude, the farmers whose crops had flourished because of my advice, the students who told me I inspired them to pursue agricultural science. Could I really abandon all of that? Could I let the whispers erase the truth? One particularly hard evening, I drove out to the edge of town, where the fields stretched wide and endless. The air was crisp, the smell of earth strong. I parked by a cornfield, stepped out, and let the wind whip my hair. Standing there, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and defiance. "This land knows me," I whispered to the dark. "It knows I've done nothing wrong." But the land couldn't speak for me. And the people wouldn't listen unless I gave them proof so undeniable they could no longer cling to their lies. So I made a decision. If loneliness was the price of holding on to truth, then I would bear it. I would not retreat. I would fight. The next morning, I returned to the institute with new resolve. I dug into years of records, compiling evidence of every recommendation I had made, every farmer's yield that had improved, every outcome that proved my integrity. I began keeping meticulous notes, not just scientific data, but dates, names, even witnesses to the advice I gave. I knew it wouldn't win everyone back. Trust once broken never fully returns. But I also knew that silence had allowed the lies to grow. It was time to shine light on them. Still, the loneliness didn't ease. My home was too quiet, my days too heavy. Some nights I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out the window at the fields, wondering if this battle would consume me completely. One evening, Emily knocked on my office door. She stepped inside, her face pale. "Dr. Ellison," she said softly, "I overheard some farmers talking at the co-op. They said, They said you're in league with a big agribusiness company, that you've been steering everyone toward their products." I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. So the rumor had grown again, twisting into something uglier. "Do you believe that, Emily?" I asked, my voice low. She hesitated. "Too long." "Then finally, I want to believe you. But it's hard when so many people are saying the same thing." Her words shattered something inside me. It wasn't just the farmers anymore. It was the very people I had mentored, the ones who knew my character best. When she left, I sank into my chair, trembling. The loneliness deepened, darker than ever. Even those closest to me were slipping away. And yet, in that moment of despair, a strange calm washed over me. If everyone believed the lie, then the only way forward was not to beg for trust, but to expose the truth. To show them not just who I was, but who was behind these poisonous whispers. As I sat there in the dim light of my office, I whispered a promise to myself. They want me broken. They want me silent. But I will not give them that satisfaction. I will find the source of this, and when I do, the truth will burn brighter than their lies. The loneliness still weighed on me, but now it carried a purpose. And purpose, even in solitude, can be a powerful weapon. The morning after Emily's visit, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The betrayal and loneliness were still there, gnawing at me like crows at a field of corn, but alongside them grew something else: resolve. If perception was the enemy, then truth would be my weapon, and I would wield it with precision. I began with the archives. The Institute had decades of data tucked away: annual yield reports, soil surveys, experimental crop trials, and letters of thanks from grateful families. I spent hours hunched over dusty files cataloging everything that could prove I had never been anyone's puppet. Each page I pulled felt like ammunition proof that my reputation had been earned, not bought. But I knew papers alone wouldn't silence the whispers. People trusted stories more than numbers. They wanted faces, names, testimony. So I dug deeper. I opened a leather-bound notebook and began writing everything down: dates, farmers' names, the advice I gave, and the outcomes that followed. If I told the Johnson family to diversify with soybeans, I wrote it. If I warned the Richards not to plant too much corn, I wrote it. And when harvest time came, I noted whether the advice had saved them or cost them. My notes weren't just records anymore. They were a diary of truth, a shield against lies. Still, I kept this work private. To the outside world, I carried on as usual. I gave lectures, walked fields, attended meetings. But in the evenings alone in my farmhouse, I transformed into a detective. I pinned charts to my walls, highlighting patterns, tracing rumors back to their sources. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I noticed something strange. Many of the accusations, though spread through different mouths, carried the same phrasing. She's tied to suppliers. She pushes certain fertilizers. The words repeated like a script. That wasn't coincidence, that was orchestration. And orchestration meant someone was behind this. The thought sent a chill down my spine. If someone was deliberately spreading lies, then my fight wasn't just against gossip, it was against an enemy I couldn't yet see. One evening, I confided in my old friend Daniel, a retired farmer who had known me since childhood. He invited me to his porch where we sat in rocking chairs watching the sunset burn orange across the horizon. "Danny," I said softly, "you've heard what people are saying. You know it isn't true." He nodded, his eyes steady. "I know, Margaret, but not everyone thinks for themselves. They follow the loudest voice." "That's just it," I leaned closer. "These lies aren't random. They're too coordinated. Someone's planting them." Daniel frowned. "You think someone's trying to take you down on purpose?" "I know it," I whispered. "And I intend to find out who." He patted my hand. "Then keep digging. But be careful. When people fight this dirty, they don't stop at whispers." His warning sat heavy with me, but it didn't deter me. If anything, it sharpened my resolve. The next week, I attended another community meeting. This time, I didn't stand at the podium. I sat quietly in the back, notebook in hand. I listened. And as the discussions unfolded, I noticed something. The loudest critics all repeated the same points, almost word for word. Supplier kickbacks, profit sharing, hidden deals. They sounded rehearsed. After the meeting, I approached one of the farmers, an older man named Clyde. He shifted uncomfortably as I drew near. "Clyde," I said gently, "you've known me for years. Why are you saying these things?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I just heard it from others. Don't know where it started." "From who?" I pressed. He hesitated. Then finally, "Jacob. And that big fellow from Agrimax, the seed distributor. They were talking about it at the co-op." Agrimax. The name hit me like a strike of lightning. They were one of the largest agribusiness companies in the region, notorious for undercutting small farmers and pushing their products with ruthless tactics. I had clashed with them before, criticizing their predatory practices in public forums. If anyone had a reason to discredit me, it was them. Suddenly, everything clicked. The repetition, the escalation, the coordinated whispers. It wasn't just community gossip. It was a campaign. And Jacob. He was their puppet, or worse, their willing partner. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, the evidence beginning to form a clear picture. Agrimax had the resources. Jacob had the ambition. Together, they were feeding lies to the community, hoping to erode trust in me and, by extension, the Institute. I felt anger surge through me, hotter than anything I'd felt before. They weren't just questioning me. They were threatening the very heart of what I had built. And if they succeeded, it wouldn't just be my reputation that suffered. It would be the farmers who relied on honest advice, the students who deserved untainted education, the land itself. So I made another promise to myself: I would gather enough evidence not only to defend my name, but to expose them for what they were. I began collecting testimonies discreetly. I visited farmers who still trusted me, asking them to put in writing the advice I had given and the results they achieved. Some hesitated, afraid of backlash, but others agreed, their loyalty shining through the fog of lies. Slowly, I built a stack of letters that countered the narrative against me. At the Institute, I pulled purchase records proving that my salary came solely from my position, not from suppliers. I kept copies of every document, tucking them away in a locked drawer at home. And all the while, I played my role carefully. I didn't confront Jacob or Agrimax directly. Not yet. Like a farmer waiting for the right season, I knew timing was everything. But at night, as I looked at the evidence spread across my table, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting to the lies. I was preparing to fight back. Still, the road ahead was dangerous. Rumors are slippery, and people prefer scandal to truth. I knew that one misstep could destroy me completely. But I also knew this: the land never lies. And neither would I. I closed my notebook, whispering to myself, they wanted me weak. They wanted me broken. But all they've done is plant the seed of their own downfall. And in that moment, I knew the season of whispers was ending. The season of reckoning was coming. If part 6 had been the season of planting my evidence, part 7 was when I first saw the weeds grow tall and obvious, my enemy beginning to show its hand in daylight. It started with posters. One morning, I drove past the co-op and saw a notice tacked to the bulletin board. Is your advisor really working for you or for them? Beneath the words was a crude sketch of a woman in a suit shaking hands with a faceless man in a business tie. They hadn't written my name, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew who it meant. By evening, I saw the same poster in 3 more places: the diner window, the feed store door, even taped to the post office wall. It was no longer whispers behind my back. It was a campaign. When I walked into the diner that week, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward me, some narrowing with suspicion, others darting away in guilt. I heard one farmer mutter to his friend, "That's her, the one selling us out." I forced myself to order coffee, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. The waitress, once warm and chatty, slid the cup toward me with tight lips. I sat alone, the heat of 100 stares burning the back of my neck. Later that night, Emily called me. Her voice was shaky. "Dr. Ellison, Agrimax held a special seminar today. They told the farmers you've been steering everyone toward expensive seeds just to keep your position secure. They said the Institute's outdated, that they are the future." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was war. Agrimax wanted to tear down everything I stood for and replace it with their grip on the community. And Jacob, ambitious and reckless, was their frontman. The next day at the Institute, a group of farmers arrived, their faces stern. They demanded a meeting. In the conference room, they sat across from me, arms folded, voices sharp. "Why do you keep recommending seed mixes that only certain suppliers sell?" one asked. "Are you getting paid to push fertilizer brands?" another demanded. I met each question with calm facts, sliding papers across the table, yield charts, impartial research receipts showing no outside income. But I could see it in their eyes. Facts meant little against the poison already planted. After they left, Emily lingered. Her face was pale. "They don't trust you anymore," she whispered. "They think you're part of some deal." Her words sliced me open. That night, I drove to Daniel's farmhouse. He was sitting on the porch again, pipe smoke curling in the cool evening air. I sat heavily beside him, exhaustion in every bone. "They're not hiding it anymore, Danny," I said bitterly. "Agrimax is everywhere. Posters, meetings, whisper campaigns. They want me gone." He studied me with calm eyes. "Of course they do. You're the one voice in this county who tells farmers the truth. If they silence you, they own everyone." I clenched my fists. But how do I fight something this big? They've got money, influence people. I've just got... My voice faltered. "I've just got me." Daniel tapped his pipe against the railing. "And that's enough. You've got 30 years of history with this land. They can't buy that. What you need is timing. Let them overplay their hand. Then strike with proof they can't deny. His words settled into me like seeds into soil. Timing, patience, proof. But patience was hard when each day felt like an ambush. At the next Farmers' Forum, Agrimax's representative showed up, a man in a slick suit named Harold Pierce. He spoke with charisma, waving glossy pamphlets. Friends, why rely on outdated advice when you can trust a company with resources, research, and results? Our products are guaranteed. Unlike some people who seem more interested in controlling your choices than in seeing you prosper. His eyes flicked toward me deliberately, the crowd murmuring. I stood slowly. Mr. Pierce, you speak of resources and results. But what you don't mention is cost. How many farmers here can afford your products year after year? How many will you trap in contracts tied to your seed cycles, unable to break free? Murmurs rippled again, this time not just against me, but against him. Some heads nodded thoughtfully, but others still glared at me, their doubt unshaken. After the meeting, Jacob cornered me outside. His smirk was venomous. "You're finished, Margaret," he hissed. "People don't want your lectures anymore. They want progress. Agrimax is the future, and I'm with them. You should step aside before you're pushed aside." I stared at him, anger rising. "You think they care about you, Jacob? You're just a tool. And when they're done using you, they'll toss you aside like a broken plow." He leaned in, his breath sharp. "Maybe, but by then, you'll be nothing." His words echoed long after he left. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, surrounded by notes, evidence letters of testimony. My hands shook, but my mind was steady. Agrimax had declared war. Jacob had betrayed me fully. The farmers were divided, but I was not broken. I whispered to the empty house. "You want a fight? Then you'll have one. And when the truth comes out, it won't just save me, it will burn you to the ground." I slid my papers into neat piles, locking them away. The season of patience was nearly over. The season of confrontation was about to begin. And as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of my lonely farmhouse, I realized something. For the first time in months, I was not afraid. I was ready. The day of the County Agricultural Forum should have been routine. For 30 years, I had stood before those gatherings with pride, my notes in hand, my voice steady as I spoke of crop resilience, soil conservation, and sustainable farming. But this year, as I stepped into the hall, I felt the tension before I even reached the podium. The atmosphere was different, heavier. Farmers filled the seats not with the eager expressions of people ready to learn, but with faces hardened by doubt. Their eyes didn't shine with curiosity, they burned with suspicion. And near the front, I saw Harold Pierce from Agrimax, his slick suit and smug smile glowing under the fluorescent lights. Beside him, Jacob Mills sat tall, his arms folded, radiating the arrogance of someone convinced he had already won. I gripped my notes tighter and walked to the podium, forcing myself to keep my shoulders square. My presentation was simple, the results of a season's worth of trials on crop diversification, showing how farmers could avoid devastating losses by rotating properly. The information was sound-tested, undeniable. I had just begun when Harold raised his hand with theatrical flourish. "Dr. Ellison," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "before you continue, don't you think it's fair to disclose your financial interests in the products you recommend?" The words hung in the air like a bomb. The crowd erupted in murmurs. I froze. "I have no financial interests," I replied firmly, my voice sharper than I intended. "Every recommendation I make is based on data, not profit." Jacob leapt to his feet. "Lies!" he shouted. His face flushed. "You've been taking money from seed companies for years. Everyone knows it." The murmurs turned into a roar. People craned their necks, whispering to one another. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy, but the tide of doubt was unmistakable. I could feel my heart hammering, my throat tightening. For a moment, I considered walking away, letting the storm swallow me, but something inside me snapped. I slammed my palm on the podium, the sound cracking through the hall. Enough, I said, my voice carrying over the chaos. For decades, I've stood here and given everything I have to this community. I've walked your fields, studied your soil, celebrated your good harvests, and grieved with you in the bad. And now you dare to stand here and call me a liar. The room went silent, all eyes locked on me. You demand proof, I continued, my voice trembling with fury but steady in rhythm. I have it. Years of records, letters from your own families thanking me when my advice saved your farms. Charts that show your yields increasing because of what we built together, not because of Agrimax, not because of bribes, because the land tells the truth, and I've always listened to it. Harold stood unbothered, his smile widening. Ah, but papers can be forged, and stories can be twisted. What the people see, Dr. Ellison, is that you profit while they struggle. And perception, my dear, is stronger than your statistics. The cruelty of his words made my chest ache. And then Jacob stepped forward, pointing at me like a prosecutor. She's the reason some of us are drowning in debt. She told us to plant crops that failed while her friends in the companies made millions. She's nothing but a fraud. The hall erupted again, farmers shouting, some in agreement, some in protest. The noise was deafening. I stood frozen, my notes shaking in my hands. This was it. The breaking point. Years of service undone by lies shouted loud enough to drown the truth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I stood still, letting the storm rage around me. Inside, something shifted. It was as though the fire of humiliation burned away my fear, leaving behind only steel. I thought of Paul, of his steady voice. The land doesn't lie, Margaret. It never does. I took a deep breath, and when I spoke again, my voice cut through the noise like a blade. You can accuse me all you want, I said coldly, but the truth will come out. And when it does, it won't just clear my name. It will expose every single one of you who chose to betray me for profit and power. The shouting faltered, replaced by a stunned hush. My words had struck a nerve. Harold's smile stiffened. Jacob shifted uneasily, his bravado cracking just slightly. I gathered my notes, pressed them to my chest, and stepped down from the podium. The crowd parted as I walked out, their whispers following me like shadows. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a slap. I leaned against my car, trembling, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. That night, back at the farmhouse, I collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. My body shook with exhaustion, but my mind was alight with clarity. They had tried to break me. They had humiliated me in front of everyone. And in that moment, I realized I had nothing left to lose. If the whispers had been storms, today was the hurricane. But hurricanes, no matter how fierce, always pass. And when they do, they leave the debris exposed. I whispered to myself, the time has come. They think they've broken me. They think they've won. But they don't know what I have. They don't know what I've prepared. I looked at the stacks of files spread across my table, the letters, the data, the testimonies. Proof. Unshakable proof. And for the first time in months, I felt not despair, but anticipation. The storm had reached its peak. Now came the moment to reveal what I had been gathering in silence. And when I did, I knew it would change everything. The morning after the forum, I sat in my office at the Institute, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The humiliation from the previous night still burned like fire under my skin. I had been accused, publicly stripped bare in front of people I had given my life to. But beneath the raw shame, something steadier had taken root, a resolve so sharp it felt like steel running through my veins. They wanted me broken. Instead, they had lit a fire. I began by pulling open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a folder I had been compiling for weeks, my insurance, my weapon. Letters of testimony, purchase receipts, income statements, and decades of yield reports. It was the kind of evidence no rumor could erase. But I knew it wasn't enough to wave papers in the air. I needed something undeniable, something so damning that even Harold Pierce and his Agrimax machine couldn't talk their way out of it. And then, almost by chance, I stumbled across it. I was sifting through old correspondence when I found an email chain forwarded to me months ago by mistake. It was from an Agrimax regional manager boasting to a colleague about using community voices to discredit opposition. He mentioned Jacob Mills by name. The words leapt off the screen, each one searing into me like a brand. Jacob is proving useful. Farmers trust a local face more than corporate suits. By the time Ellison is discredited, we'll have the entire county locked into our contracts. My breath caught. My hands trembled. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. Proof that Agrimax had orchestrated everything, the rumors, the humiliation, the posters, all of it. Jacob wasn't just a loudmouth farmer with ambition. He was their weapon. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing on the screen, my heart racing. For weeks, I had felt like a woman standing alone in a storm, beaten by winds she couldn't fight. But now I realized the storm had a source, and I had just uncovered it. That night, I drove to Daniel's farmhouse with the folder under my arm. He poured me a cup of coffee and listened as I laid out the papers across his kitchen table. His weathered hands traced the letters, the charts, the damning email. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes burned with the same fire I felt. "Margaret, this isn't just your defense. This is their death sentence." "I know," I whispered. "But you have to be smart," he warned. "If you go too early, they'll spin it. If you wait too long, they'll destroy you completely. Timing is everything." Timing. Always timing. The farmer's lesson applied to more than soil and rain, it applied to battles too. The next few days I carried the folder everywhere like a talisman. During lectures, while walking the fields, even when I slept, it was never far from me. It was my truth, my salvation, and soon it would be my weapon. But carrying that truth made me more dangerous, and I knew it. I began to notice things I hadn't before. A black sedan parked across from my farmhouse 2 nights in a row. Strange phone calls that went silent when I answered. At the institute, a custodian mentioned seeing Jacob snooping near my office after hours. They suspected I had something, and they were watching me. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the folder spread before me. The shadows of the farmhouse pressed in around me. For a moment, fear gnawed at me. What if they tried to take more than my reputation? What if they wanted to silence me permanently? Agrimax was powerful, ruthless, and Jacob, desperate for validation, was reckless enough to do anything. But then I thought of the farmers, the families, the land. If I stayed silent, Agrimax would own them all, trapping them in endless contracts, bleeding them dry. My life's work would be erased, and generations would pay the price. No, I wouldn't allow it. The next morning, I went to the institute and gathered my senior staff. Emily was there, her face pale with guilt. For weeks she had doubted me, but I needed her now, not as an enemy, but as an ally. I laid the folder on the table and opened it. One by one, I showed them the letters of testimony, the yield charts, the financial statements, and finally, the email. Silence filled the room as they read it, the words sinking in like stones. Emily's eyes widened, her voice trembling. They used Jacob. They planted everything." "Yes," I said coldly. "And they think they've won. But they don't realize I've been gathering proof while they were spreading lies." One of the staff members whispered, "If you go public with this, it will ruin them." I nodded. That's the point. For the first time in months, I felt the tide shift. Not fully, not yet, but I could see the current turning. My staff looked at me with something I hadn't seen in their eyes for a long time: respect. That evening, I drove back through town. The posters still hung in shop windows, bold in their accusation. But I didn't look away this time. I looked at them and thought, your days are numbered. When I reached the farmhouse, I locked the folder in a steel box and placed it beneath the floorboards in my bedroom. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was survival. If they came for me, the truth had to remain safe. That night, as the wind howled outside and the old house creaked, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the faces of the farmers, the anger in their eyes, the betrayal in Jacob's smirk, the arrogance in Harold's smile. Soon those expressions would change. I whispered into the darkness, my voice steady, almost calm. How do you think they will react when I reveal that to everyone? The folder beneath my floorboards felt like a living thing. Every time I stepped into my bedroom, I could almost hear it pulsing, whispering of the storm it would unleash. For weeks, I had endured humiliation, whispers, and suspicion. Now I finally held the truth in my hands, but Daniel's words echoed in my head. Timing is everything. If I revealed my evidence too soon, Agrimax would drown it in counterclaims and propaganda. If I waited too long, they might destroy me completely. So I chose my moment carefully, like a farmer who waits for the rain to fall before planting seeds. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The county fair was approaching, the one event where every farmer supplier and community member gathered. It wasn't just a fair, it was the heartbeat of our county livestock shows, crop displays, competition speeches. And that year, Agrimax had secured the keynote slot. Harold Pierce himself would be addressing the crowd, promising a new future in farming. I knew then this was it. My chance. My battlefield. But preparation was everything. In the days leading up to the fair, I doubled my efforts. I organized the folder meticulously, dividing the evidence into sections: testimonies from farmers' financial records, yield improvements, and finally the damning email linking Agrimax and Jacob. I made copies of everything, stored one at the Institute, one with Daniel, and kept the original hidden at the farmhouse. If they tried to destroy one set, the truth would still survive. Emily approached me one evening as I worked late in my office. Her eyes were haunted, but her voice was steady. "Dr. Ellison," she said quietly, "I want to help." I looked up, studying her. For weeks she had doubted me, parroting the rumors. But in her expression now I saw something else: shame and determination. "You're sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said firmly. "I believed the whispers. I was wrong. I see that now. Tell me what to do." I handed her a stack of copies. "Distribute these quietly, to board members, to trusted farmers. Not many, just enough that when the time comes, people will already know the truth." She nodded, clutching the papers to her chest as though they were holy. The night before the fair, I barely slept. I walked through the farmhouse, pacing the creaking floors, rehearsing my words. My heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with anticipation. Tomorrow I would face Harold Pierce and Jacob Mills in front of the entire community. Tomorrow I would shatter their lies. The fairgrounds buzzed with life the next day. Children laughed near the rides, the smell of fried food filled the air, and families crowded around stalls of produce and livestock. But beneath the merriment there was tension. Everyone knew Agrimax's speech would be the centerpiece, and everyone expected me to be humiliated once again. I stood at the edge of the crowd waiting. Harold took the stage, his voice smooth as silk, his smile dazzling. "Friends," he began, spreading his arms wide, "we are on the brink of a new age in farming. Agrimax is here to provide you with the best products, the most advanced seeds, and the security of guaranteed success. Why cling to outdated advice when progress is right here before you?" Applause rippled through the crowd. I saw Jacob near the front, grinning triumphantly, soaking in Harold's words as if they were his own victory. Harold continued, his voice rising. "And let's not forget, some have claimed to guide you, but in truth, they've sought only their own gain. Isn't it time we moved past false prophets and embraced real innovation?" A murmur spread through the audience. Eyes turned toward me, standing in the back. My pulse thundered. That was my cue. I stepped forward, my voice strong as I called out, "And what about lies? Harold, should we embrace those too?" The crowd hushed, parting as I made my way to the stage. Harold's smile faltered, but he quickly regained it, masking his unease. "Dr. Ellison," he said smoothly, "how bold of you to join us. but really, isn't this the time for progress, not defensiveness? I climbed the steps and turned to face the crowd. My heart hammered, but my voice rang clear. For months I've been accused, called a fraud, a thief, a woman who sold out her community. I stayed silent not because I was guilty, but because I was gathering proof. And today, I bring it to you. Gasps rippled through the audience. I held up the folder thick with documents. These are yield reports showing how your harvests improved under my guidance. These are letters from your own families thanking me when advice saved their farms. These are financial statements proving I have never accepted a dime from suppliers. I laid each stack on the table beside me, the papers fluttering in the breeze. And this, I lifted the final sheet high, is an email. An email from Agrimax naming Jacob Mills as their pawn, admitting they planted these rumors to destroy me and control this county. The crowd erupted. Shouts, gasps, disbelief. Faces turned toward Jacob, whose smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Harold's mask cracked, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is the truth," I declared, my voice breaking but strong. "I gave my life to this land, to you, to the farmers who trusted me. And I will not stand by while a corporation poisons our community with lies." For a moment, the fairground was chaos. Farmers surged forward, some grabbing copies of the documents, others shouting at Harold and Jacob. The tide had turned. I could feel it in the air, thick and electric. Harold tried to speak, raising his hands, but the crowd drowned him out. Jacob stumbled back, his face pale, muttering denials that no one believed. I stood tall, the folder clutched in my hands, my chest heaving. For the first time in months, I wasn't the accused. I was the accuser. And as the sun blazed down on the fairgrounds, I realized something. The season of whispers was over. The season of truth had begun. The fairground had turned into a battlefield of voices. My folder of evidence lay spread across the table, on stage documents fluttering in the late afternoon breeze. Some farmers grabbed copies, reading them aloud, their anger rising with every line. Others stood frozen, their faces pale, unwilling to accept what they were seeing. Jacob had vanished into the crowd, slipping away like a coward. Harold Pierce, however, remained, his slick composure cracking under the weight of the uproar. He tried to shout over the chaos, insisting the email was taken out of context, but his words were swallowed by the noise of a community betrayed. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one being silenced. They were. But the storm didn't end when the crowd dispersed. If anything, it only shifted. The next morning, I walked into the diner, unsure of what to expect. As soon as I stepped inside, the room fell quiet. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. For a heartbeat, I braced myself for more hostility. But then an older farmer named Clyde stood up and tipped his hat. "Margaret," he said, his voice rough but sincere, "I owe you an apology. I believed what they said. I doubted you. But after yesterday, I see now. You were telling the truth all along." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. A few people clapped. One woman even touched my arm gently as I passed, whispering, "I'm sorry." The weight of those small gestures nearly broke me. For so long I had carried only suspicion, humiliation, and betrayal. Now finally there was acknowledgement. Vindication, however small. But not everyone felt the same. Later that day, I stopped by the co-op. A group of younger farmers lingered near the counter, their faces tight with skepticism. As I walked past, one of them muttered, "She forged those papers." "Agrimax wouldn't be that stupid." Another chimed in louder, "She's just trying to save her job. Don't fall for it." I froze, their words slicing through me. Even with proof in their hands, some still clung to the lie. Not because it was true, but because it was easier than admitting they'd been fooled. That realization stung worse than any rumor. The human heart, once hardened by suspicion, doesn't soften easily. That night I sat at my kitchen table again, the farmhouse quiet around me. The folder of evidence lay open, its contents now public. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt torn in two. Half the community had rallied to me, their apologies tentative but real. The other half still doubted, muttering behind closed doors, refusing to let go of their bitterness. It was a strange kind of limbo, vindicated yet still mistrusted, victorious yet scarred. Emily came to see me the next day. Her eyes were brighter now, the guilt that once clouded them replaced by resolve. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I corrected, my voice heavy. "The truth did it. I just gave it a voice." She hesitated, then sat across from me. "Some people will never believe you no matter what. But others, you gave them back their faith. Isn't that enough?" I looked at her, my chest aching. "Is it, after all these years, is half a community enough?" She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "Sometimes you can't change everyone, but you can save those willing to listen. That's all that matters." Her words stayed with me. Over the next week, I saw the divide more clearly than ever. Some farmers sought me out, offering apologies, asking for my guidance again. Others turned their backs, refusing to meet my eyes. It was as though the community had split down the middle, truth on one side, denial on the other. And it wasn't just the farmers. The board of the institute called an emergency meeting. I walked into the conference room with my head held high, the folder under my arm. For months, I had endured their suspicion, their veiled warnings. Now I laid the evidence on the table for them to see. One by one, they read through the documents. Murmurs filled the room. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellison," he said, his voice unsteady, "we owe you an apology. We doubted your integrity. We let rumors sway us. But you've shown us the truth. The Institute stands with you." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the memory of their silence when I had needed them most. Trust restored is never as strong as trust unbroken. Still, I nodded, accepting their support. "Thank you," I said simply. But the fight wasn't over. Agrimax wasn't gone. Harold Pierce had retreated, yes. But I knew men like him. They didn't give up. They regrouped. And Jacob had disappeared from public view, but whispers suggested he was still meeting with Agrimax representatives. The war wasn't finished, it had only shifted. One evening, Daniel came by the farmhouse. He sat on the porch with me, the crickets chirping in the fields. "You did what you had to do," he said. "You exposed them. But you look tired." I laughed bitterly. "I am tired, Danny. Tired of fighting, tired of defending myself, tired of proving the truth over and over." He puffed on his pipe, exhaling a thin line of smoke. "Truth is never easy, but it's worth it. And you've planted a seed now. It'll grow. Maybe not in everyone's field, but in enough." I leaned back, closing my eyes. His words were comforting, but the ache in my chest remained. I had thought exposing Agrimax would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like survival. Because the truth had set me free, yes. But it had also revealed the fragility of the bonds I once believed unbreakable. The next morning, I returned to the fields. The soil was rich beneath my boots, the crops swaying in the breeze. The land at least had never betrayed me. It didn't whisper lies or spread rumors. It only reflected what was planted in it. And for the first time in months, I felt a fragile kind of peace. Yet I knew the scars would remain. Some neighbors would always see me through the lens of suspicion. Some would never forgive me for proving them wrong. And perhaps that was the hardest truth of all, that victory doesn't erase betrayal. It only coexists with it. I whispered to the fields I did what I had to do. But was it enough? The wind rustled through the crops, offering no answer. In the weeks following the fair, the county felt different. The truth had been planted, and like any seed, it began to grow, not evenly, not quickly, but steadily. Farmers who had once turned their backs on me now came to the institute quietly at first, then more openly. Some offered apologies, some simply asked for advice, as if the past months had never happened. But while the community shifted, Agrimax began to unravel. It started with the local paper. An investigative journalist, tipped off by the documents Emily and I had shared, ran a front-page story. Agrimax's secret campaign to undermine local farmers exposed. The article included excerpts from the very email that had once made my hands tremble, proof that Agrimax had weaponized lies to discredit me and seize control. It spread beyond our county, picked up by regional outlets, then national ones. Within a week, Agrimax found itself under scrutiny not just from angry farmers but from state regulators. Harold Pierce disappeared from town almost overnight. The posters vanished. The slick smiles and glossy pamphlets were nowhere to be seen. For the first time in months, I could walk into the diner without feeling every eye on me. But Jacob Mills, he wasn't gone. He resurfaced quietly, skulking in the background, his once proud voice reduced to muttering excuses. Some farmers confronted him, furious that he had sold out the very people he claimed to represent. Others pitied him, calling him a fool used by Agrimax. But to me, his betrayal cut too deep to ever be softened by pity. One evening, as I left the institute, I found Jacob waiting by my car. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling, "I didn't know they'd use me like that." I thought I was helping us move forward. I stared at him, my jaw tight. "You thought selling lies was progress." He flinched. "I was wrong. I see that now. Please believe me." For a long moment, I said nothing. My heart ached with the memory of his betrayal, the way he had mocked me in front of the community, the way he had smirked while I stood humiliated. And yet, standing there in the fading light, I saw not power in him, but ruin. Agrimax had chewed him up and spat him out. "I don't hate you, Jacob," I said finally, my voice low, "but I will never trust you again." His shoulders slumped. Without another word, he walked away, disappearing into the dusk. That night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, Daniel joined me. He had a copy of the paper in hand, the headline bold against the fading sunlight. "You did it," he said simply. I shook my head. "No, the truth did. I just carried it." He chuckled softly. "Carried it, Margaret. You dragged it through mud, through fire, and through the weight of a whole town's suspicion. Don't downplay what you did." I smiled faintly, but the heaviness lingered. "Then why doesn't it feel like victory?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, puffing on his pipe. "Because victory doesn't erase the scars. You lost trust. You lost friends. You lost pieces of yourself along the way. Winning doesn't heal that overnight. But look around you. Farmers are coming back to you. Agrimax is exposed. That's more than most ever get." His words settled over me like a quilt, not comforting but grounding. The following week, state officials arrived to interview me. They asked about Agrimax, about the emails, about the rumors. I gave them everything I had, every document, every testimony. When they left, one of them shook my hand and said, "You've done a service not just for your county but for farmers across this state. What you uncovered goes far beyond here." It should have felt triumphant. And in a way it did. But alongside pride, there was grief. Grief for the friendships lost, for the trust that would never fully return, for the nights I had sat alone in my farmhouse, drowning in doubt and loneliness. Still, I couldn't deny the change around me. At the Institute, students once again filled the lecture halls, listening intently as I spoke of soil and sustainability. Farmers invited me back onto their fields, their voices tentative but hopeful. Even at church, where once I had felt only cold stares, people now greeted me with cautious warmth. One Sunday, Helen approached me after service. She wrapped me in a hug, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have believed you, Margaret. I'm sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. "It's all right, Helen. We were all deceived." But inside I knew it wasn't all right. Forgiveness didn't erase the wound. It only bandaged it. As autumn deepened, I found myself spending more time in the fields again. Walking among the rows of corn, I felt the soil beneath my boots steady and unchanging. The land had always told the truth, even when people didn't. It was the land that had reminded me to keep fighting, and it was the land that now gave me peace. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, I stood at the edge of a field and whispered, "We did it, Paul. We survived." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of earth and grain. And for a moment I felt him there, steady and strong, reminding me of what he used to say: "The land doesn't lie." Agrimax would face its reckoning in the courts. Jacob would live with his disgrace. The community would heal slowly, unevenly, but it would heal. And me, I would carry on. Scarred, yes, but unbroken. Because the truth had survived. And so had I. The winter that followed felt quieter than any I had ever known. Not silent, the land never is, but quieter in a way that gave me room to breathe. The howling wind across the fields seemed less like a warning and more like a song of survival. Agrimax was gone from our county. The state investigation dug deep into their practices, exposing manipulation, false contracts, and targeted campaigns far beyond what I had uncovered. Newspapers reported on lawsuits, government hearings, and farmers testifying about being pressured into deals they couldn't afford. For once, the spotlight was on them, not on me. But despite the vindication, I carried myself differently. There was no triumphal swagger in my step. No, I told you. So smirk to toss at those who had doubted me. Instead, I carried the knowledge of what betrayal does to a soul. And I carried the understanding that trust once broken never grows back the same way. Some farmers approached me with apologies, and I accepted them with grace even if a small piece of me still ached. Others avoided me altogether, embarrassed by the part they had played in the whispers. A few remained hostile, clinging to their disbelief, unwilling to admit they had been wrong. But I no longer fought for their approval. I learned something in those long, painful months of suspicion. The only voices that truly matter are the ones that carry honesty. And honesty is something you can hear in silence, in the soil, in the rhythm of your own heartbeat. One afternoon, Emily stopped by my office. She had grown through this ordeal, hardened in some ways, humbled in others. She placed a stack of new research proposals on my desk and smiled shyly. "Dr. Ellison," she said, "you taught me more than agriculture. You taught me what it means to fight for truth." Her words filled me with a quiet warmth. It reminded me why I had chosen this path in the first place, not for recognition, not for profit, but for the chance to leave behind something honest, something enduring. As the snow fell softly outside, I thought of Paul. I imagined him sitting across from me, his eyes steady, his voice reminding me, "The land doesn't lie, Margaret. It never does." I whispered back, "I know love," and it carried me through. When spring came, I walked through the fields with a new sense of peace. The soil was damp beneath my boots, the air rich with promise. Farmers greeted me along the way, some with warm smiles, others with tentative nods. I accepted them all. Because I wasn't fighting to be loved anymore. I was standing in the truth, and that was enough. I realized then that revenge had never truly been my goal. What I wanted was justice, and justice had come not in a blaze of glory but in steady, undeniable light. I paused at the edge of a cornfield, watching the green shoots break through the soil. The land was teaching me again, even after storms, even after the ground is torn apart. Life returns. Slowly, quietly. But it returns, and so did I. Slow fade out, 200, 300 words. Now as I sit here and tell you this story, I feel the weight of those months like a scar across my heart. I survived the whispers, the betrayal, the loneliness that nearly broke me. And I came out standing not unscathed, but unshaken in what matters most, the truth. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had given up, if I had walked away, sold the farmhouse, abandoned the institute. Agrimax would have owned this county. Farmers would be trapped in contracts they couldn't escape. And my life's work, decades of honest labor, would have been reduced to ashes in the fire of rumors. But I didn't give up. I fought. Quietly, steadily, with evidence, and with conviction. And though I lost some trust that will never return, I gained something far greater, the knowledge that even when people falter, the truth will not. So I ask you, now, have you ever been betrayed by those you trusted most? Have you ever had to fight to prove the truth of who you are? If you have, then you know the pain. And you also know the power that comes when you refuse to bow to lies. Share your story with us. Subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories like mine. And remember, the land doesn't lie, and neither should we.